Thank you for tuning in to my fourth Q&A video. Some of the questions I'm going to go over in this video are going to be on outside playing, so different ways of playing outside, reharmonizing a standard, looking at some left-hand technique with laying over from one string to the next, some suggestions for good solos if you're beginning to transcribe jazz solos, and then I'm going to talk a bit about tone in terms of gear and also about just the technique of getting a good tone. Remember that if you have a question, then you can of course leave a comment on this video, and then maybe I can get to it in a later Q&A video, or maybe I can answer it right in the comments. And another good feature about leaving a comment on this video is that a lot of people are actually checking out the comments, so you might get an answer, or somebody might have some information or some experience to share, and will leave that as a reply to your comment. So if you have a question, leave a comment on the video, but also if you have something to add to the discussion, then please leave an answer or some information there, and help us all out with what you know and what you've been through. So let's just get started. I would be very interested in chord subs and reharmonizations. What is harmonic-wise possible to make a standard more interesting? So when you're reharmonizing a standard, then you are reharmonizing a melody. It's not the title you're reharmonizing. So you have to take the melody into account whenever you're working with this, and you can't just look at the chords. That's not really going to make too much sense. It's also not too much of a restriction really, because in that way you just find different solutions that will fit different kinds of melodies, and you get really used to thinking like that quite quickly. I can't really give you of course all options for what you can do with a standard, but I can maybe give you some ideas from an example. So if we take the song Night and Day, so the first 4 bars of that in the key of C will be this. So quite simple, it's a Cole Porter tune, so of course it has a lot of 4 minor, so it starts with an A flat major, which is a 4 minor chord in C, then to G7, which I'm playing as a G7 from the alto scale or from harmonic minor, so it's like a minor dominant also, and then resolving to the 1 chord, which is a C major 7. So if we look at this, then we're talking about, we have a cadence, obviously, that's just a cadence to C, and we start in 4 minor, then we go to the dominant, and then we go to the tonic to resolve. So you can sort of mess with all of those areas and try to reharmonize them. I think the one where you can do the least is probably right away is the dominant, because you kind of have 2 choices for a dominant. We can play it as a dominant here. We could of course choose to say it's this kind of dominant with a normal 13 and stuff, but that's not so evident from the melody that that's the case. It could work, and we can make a tritone substitution of it. So we play D flat 7, so you play. But it's not making really a big difference, I think. So the place we need to start probably is to look at the subdominant chord. So this is a 4 minor chord. We can of course also just try and make it a normal 4 chord. So the 4th degree in C, or the subdominant in C would be something like D minor or F major, and they're both possible, I guess. So, and here you can hear that there's really something happening. It doesn't sound in itself really strange, but if you're expecting the other sound, then it's quite surprising, I guess. I mean, the point of making a reharmonization is to make a sound that is different and surprising, and in that way sort of keeping the interest in what is going on. So we can make it into a D minor 11. Of course you can make it into an F chord as well. Of course then you would have to still go to the G. You can also change the G into a 4 minor. So instead of going to the dominant, we're going to go 4 minor. So, and here I'm using a B flat 7. So that would be an option. We can also make the whole cadence just 4 minor, so that would be F minor, B flat 7, and then to C. That will work as well. But again, this is fairly standard sounding stuff, because we just have a cadence and we're trying out different variations of the cadence and seeing what fits. If we want to take something that's maybe a little bit further away, then we can go a little bit further in the 4 minor and try and see what we can make out of it. The Neapolitan subdominant, so the D flat major 7, which is also a 4 minor chord, could be one way to do that. So that would be. So then you, instead of A flat, you get this sound, and just already because you have a major 7, sharp 11, so you get the melody becomes really sort of a strong sounding extension on the chord. That already helps a bit. You can really hear now we changed something. This is not what a normal standard sounds like. And then I had sort of, it kind of feels right to do, to go from the D flat and then up to a D just for the 2-5. But you don't have to, but I think that makes more sense actually. And we can also change the cadence, I guess, so that we start on F, and then we go to the sharp 4. So we have, instead of the dominant, we have a sharp 4 now, so you get sort of you almost want to put a G and a bass on the C. So that would be an option as well. And this is just within the key. If we start then looking at, I mean, of course you can also just try out other things, you know, in the end. Right now I'm looking from the key, and then I'm trying to find something that fits, but in general what I'm actually doing is finding chords that I know will work well with that melody. So for that first chord I just have something with a G in the melody, and then whatever it's going to be, you know, it's really up to what I find sounds nice, really. Yeah, and then when we're looking like this, another place where we can sort of start messing around is to say, well, if we want to make something sound surprising, then actually the place where everything sort of falls into place is when we hit the C chord. So maybe we can sort of do something with the C chord so that sounds less like we're really resolving, because then we get, and then when we expect to get this, we get something else. So we have an E in the melody. So I think the first thing I would probably try is like a sharp 5 chord, because that's already not a really stable sound, and you can always just resolve it later also. So that would be something like. So that works really well. So now we're altering it. We can of course also do the instead of the sharp 5, we can do the sharp 11 or flat 5, and then that's another sound. And if we start looking for completely different chords, then what worked well with the other one was when we had this with the 4th minor, that we had this the melody note as sort of an interesting sounding note here, and you could try and work with that as well when you have something instead of the C. So we can actually we just need an E in the melody, and then we can take something that will fit in the chord. We do the same. So instead of doing so it should be the flat 5 of a chord. So that's a B flat major 7 flat 5. Then you get which is definitely, it's a stable sound. You can do it like that. Let's see, what else could it be? One that's really good is you can also take a look at the cadence and then see if you can sort of resolve it in a different way. These are also small tricks that you kind of need to just try out and see if it fits with the melody. But if we have a G7, then of course a G7 will resolve to C major. But it can also be a tritone substitute, so it can also resolve to a G flat major. Now that doesn't really work too well. We could of course resolve it to some sort of G flat 7 or something. Yeah, which in this song is not so nice, but it's possible sometimes. But G7 is also a 4 minor chord in A major, and there we also have an A. So now we can take an A major chord. That's sort of the reasoning. This is really just freely associating on what's possible. Huh? So that's a completely different sound. You can really hear that it kind of, the cadence to some degree really makes a lot of sense. But this one is really surprising, and still it's a stable sound. It's just not what we expect. I think that's something that's really useful for reharmonization. If you can make something that it makes sense, you can't just throw random chords together too much. It kind of has to somehow make sense also. And in this case, like using the A major like this will work really well. Once we get a little bit further, we need to play this in the fourth bar of the song. So we need to do something about it there, but you could start with this. So that's some options. I think the thing to keep in mind with this is just that you need to take care of what is going on with the melody, and then the more you know about harmony, the more options you have for making a harmonization that will really make sense. Because that's often, you still want to have some sort of relation between the different chords, and you want to have some sort of logical moving progression. Another way to approach this is, of course, to just force some sort of bass line movement on it. That can work as well. So I don't know, we could do in this one like. So now I have just a chromatically ascending bass line with different chords, and these kind of things will work as well. And that's just sort of knowing the melody really well, and then just looking at like what can I get away with in terms of that, and then just saying, well, if I have this melody note and that bass note or that bass note, what kind of chord will I put in there? So that's what I did now. So now I did, see if I remember actually. So I think I did A flat major 7, A7 altered, then we got the B flat major 7, flat 5, some sort of B minor 7 with an 11, maybe a B half diminished, C minor, just because that's really close to where we came from, D flat 7, which is of course also just tritone substitute, and then some sort of D sus. So that's another way to look at it. We could do the other way as well, even though, no, that will work as well actually. I mean, that's just about looking and seeing what you can fit in there. These experiments and finding out how it sounds is something you just sit around and do until you come up with something nice. I think if you look at the harmonizations of people like Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock and Brad Mehldau, that's probably also what they did, and you just build sort of a vocabulary and you just experiment to find some nice solutions. Now I want to study some guitar solos from masters, but I don't know where to start from. Maybe Grant Green is a little easier than learning Wes or Joe Pass solos by ear. What do you recommend me? Thank you for your videos. When you want to choose a solo to transcribe, I think you want to try and find something that's probably not too long in the beginning, or you just immediately just set your goal for just doing a part of a solo. Say, well, I want to do 2 or 3 choruses, and then make it an achievable goal, because it's transcribing, if you're not used to it, can be really difficult. At least I found it quite difficult in the beginning. And then when you're transcribing, I gather from what you're writing, you're probably trying to transcribe because you want to develop your sort of your bop vocabulary, and you want to check out some of the more traditional and classic solos. So probably you want to transcribe something from that era. And indeed, Grant Green can be good. I think his swing can be maybe a little bit tricky, but that's a question of taste also. For Wes, I think you can do. There are some Wes solos that you can do for sure. If you take some of the earlier stuff, especially. The first recording of 4 and 6 from, I think it's from The Incredible Jazz Guitar, with Tommy Flanagan on piano. That's not as fast as the other ones. The one from Smoking on the Half Note. It's also, I think it's a little bit shorter. And you can of course just do the single note part of it. You don't have to do the whole solo. You don't have to do the octaves, and you don't have to do the chords either. Just do that part, because that's what you're probably trying to learn when you're transcribing. And that's not so difficult to play. It's like something like this, and also in that tempo. So that could be something to check out. Definitely, if you would like to transcribe some Wes, you need to check some solos that you like also. I think you're better off doing that because you have to listen a lot to them, and you have to spend a lot of time with them. So make sure you take something that you also really like, and you can better spend a few more hours searching for a solo that you think, okay, this is going to be fun to check out. So when you transcribe a solo, the first thing you want to do is just listen to it. So just spend 2 or 3 days listening to it, and then try to listen. You can even, for me, it's like I just take that solo. If I know the song already, then I take the solo and then I just listen to it, take it back and listen to it again, and then do that 4 or 5 times in a sitting, just to really hear what's going on. And I'm not even trying to play it, I'm just listening to it, because when I do it like that, then it's so much easier to transcribe once I start trying to figure out what's going on. I start to already memorize in a more loose way. You memorize the phrases and you can sort of hear what's going on instead of having to go note by note, and that approach, because that takes really long. So my experience is really try and listen a lot in the beginning. Okay, so dual pass solos. I don't really know any really easy dual pass solos. I would imagine that there might be some in the Oscar Peterson repertoire, but it could, I have no idea. I'm not that familiar with his stuff. I think the solos I played from him were all fairly difficult, and quite a lot of work to check out. Grant Green is good. So some of the first stuff I transcribed was from Pat Martino, from his debut album, which is called El Hombre. And I can really recommend that. That's a really cool album to check out anyway. It's in my video on the top classic jazz albums, and there's a lot of stuff in there that you can do. I think if you take later stuff from him, it's difficult to transcribe. It's just complicated, and there are lots of long 8-note lines and stuff like that. And I think in the beginning it's a little bit easier, and it's quite traditional. He's really sort of trying to play like Wes. I almost get the impression. I'm not sure if it's true, but so that's good. I've had students who come in with Kenny Burrell solos a few times, and they're also really good. There's they're called Midnight Blue, I think, that album, where he plays a few fairly easy tunes, and they're good to check out. The phrasing is fine, and the solos are not that long, and they're fairly easy to play. Also, the earlier George Benson albums have some stuff that's good to do, but don't take any of the fast things. And then so Jim Hall. I also transcribed some Jim Hall. If you take some of the earlier Jim Hall, where it's not too complicated, I think especially actually his debut album again is really good, because the songs are short. It's from the 50s, and he plays really well on them. Some of the Paul Desmond stuff. So Jim Hall with Paul Desmond, there's also some nice stuff there, but it's a little bit more complicated, and a lot of chords often, at least the stuff I know. So early Jim Hall, early Pat Martino. If you look a little bit around for some West stuff that's not too fast and not too many octaves and chords, then that can also be something to do. Kenny Burrell, try and look there, and otherwise then try, like, there are some classic stuff that you also want to check out, like Miles Davis and So What, which is in so many ways a fantastic solo. If you just want to practice transcribing, then that's a really good one to do. And there are also, I transcribed some Sonny Stitt, which is also good for your Bob language. Chet Baker can be good also. But that's like going away from guitar then, which at some point you also want to do, but if you're just now looking for guitar stuff that you can really play. And then of course there's a whole discussion on what do you actually learn from a transcription, because it's often given as sort of a general way to get better at everything. If you transcribe stuff, you're going to get better, which is of course nonsense, really. You want to transcribe, and but you have to be aware of why you do it, and what you're going to get out of it, and how you need to work with the transcription and what you do with it to really learn something from it. But for the rest, I would say, like, it's good to just be able to do so. Also because you want to be able to transcribe songs and solos and check stuff out, and you need to practice it. And it is a way to really listen a lot to those who sort of defined the genre. If you're thinking about checking out bop, like hard bop and bebop guitar playing. Do you have any tips on playing fourth intervals? I know the general idea is to bend your finger up or down accordingly, but it still can sound sloppy when I do. Any practice approaches for this? Thanks, man. So this is quite a common problem, actually. I remember struggling with this as well at some point when I changed from classical to electric guitar. mainly because on classical guitar you really do not do these things. And I think, I mean, it's also something that you always have a choice, I guess. Well, not always, but most of the time you will have a choice. You don't have to do it all the time. So I think for me what helped the most was not to really work too much on it, away from everything else. Of course you can just do the exercises like, or even if you want to put that in a context and do that with a, like with a pentatonic scale, which are good exercises. You need to check them out anyway. But at the same time, I think I was wondering more about how it worked when I was playing stuff in scales, because those are the places where you need to sort of get some habits and you need to make some choices in how you deal with it. For instance, if you're playing a major scale in thirds, so I'm just going to take this G major scale. So the problem you get where you get into trouble is like at this spot, and it's in scales it's mostly there, I think, as long as you're playing them in thirds. So right now I chose to do it with both of these, but of course you can also just choose to move around in different ways. So one of them will be and one of them won't, and there are different options, and you want to check out what you find the easiest and then stick with that in the beginning, because that's probably one you want to make your habit. And then there's going to be places where you can't really get around it, and I think if you just sort of work on it slowly, then it will come, and you will get it into your playing. I also think that if you take the scale again as an example, if you're already just playing the scale in triads, so and here you really need to sort of flip over and get that on. And this happens all the time when you're playing it like that. And I think if you just practice through your scales slowly like this, you will probably sort of get used to it and find a way to handle it in a sensible way and not have to worry too much about it. At least I think that's kind of how I work with it. There are some places where you kind of need to do it to get this legato, then that's kind of difficult. So this is just so much more efficient that you just end up doing this. And you can just see, like, you get used to the whole thing, like, you need to do this, and probably that's what feels wrong. At least for me that was like, this is not done, and I didn't like to do it. But you end up with, you kind of end up getting used to it. And I think there's really no other way. For me, it's like the learning part of it is mostly coming from like scale practice, and then mixed with other stuff. I don't really think I want to focus on this too specifically, unless it's really a huge problem. And I think in terms of just getting it clean, like mostly it's about probably not picking too hard. Well, that's not so bad actually. And then being close to the fret. Those are the things I think you want to check out with that. I don't know, I hope that helps a bit. I don't have any really specific exercises on this that I spent a lot of time on, except for maybe the sort of the different pentatonic stuff that I can't say I spent a lot of time on it, but I did practice it. And for the rest it was like just in whatever scale exercise I was doing, and in terms of triads and thirds and stuff like that. Hey, love your videos. I'd like to hear your thoughts on developing tone for the electric guitar. It feels like there's a lot to study and to invest on the gear side of things, but also a lot of depth when it comes to physical technique. They both seem like very important aspects of musicianship, and reconciling the two can get frustrating. So, tone. I guess there are two parts to this question. One is just the gear, so the amp, the guitar, the pickups, the strings, and the pick, and whatever, the effects that you're using. Another part is just how you really sort of think about this and how you work on it when you're practicing, or if you want to practice it, how do you approach that? And let's just start with the gear. So when I started playing jazz guitar, I was actually playing a Stratocaster. That was not really necessarily what you would normally consider a jazz guitar, at least not at that time. And then I switched to the Gibson that's hanging behind me, the ES-175, and they're both single coil guitars. And I wasn't really too aware of what I wanted in terms of tone. Or maybe I was aware of what I wanted, but I didn't really realize that there was a connection between the type of instrument and the type of amp and stuff like that, and then the tone that I wanted. I didn't really make that connection till quite late in my study, actually. So since they're both single coils, they lacked sustain. I think that was the one thing that I really started to realize at some point, that I wanted to have like a longer sustaining tone, so basically just more like a singing tone, to me, singing at least. And you can't really get that as easily with single coil pickups, unless you maybe use a compressor, but then there are other problems involved with that. And well, for me anyway. And so at that time I started to realize that I needed to find a guitar with humbuckers, because that was actually the people that I listened to that had that kind of tone. So I think mostly Pepitini and Kurt Rosenwinkel were playing humbucker guitars, and also like Pepitini doesn't, but Kurt plays with a similar, like a semi-hollow, so sustain block. So you're in another kind of instrument a little bit, and that meant that I shifted to that, just to get that. And that was mostly just about getting like mid-focus and sustain in my tone, I guess, so that I could just have long notes that would keep on ringing, and I can actually do something underneath them. And so that's something that you need to be aware of. Like, listen to what your ideals are, because you have an ideal, and of course it's always going to be changing. I can only really talk about this from my own perspective, so from my own experience, really. I guess you have an ideal, and you have a some sort of idea about what you want to sound like and what you want the guitar to sound like, and then you try to just put that into work and get that sound out of whatever equipment you have. Which for me meant that I before I actually went for the semi-hollow guitar, I'd already gone to get delay and reverb effects and stuff like that, and then later I found that it was easier just to put everything in one box and then get like a fractal unit, because that suits the way I work and the way I think about things, and you can really do a lot with the sound and really shape everything in terms of reverb and delay and amp and stuff like that there, which is time consuming, but for me it's paid off. I think it works well. And I'm aware of that it's not for everybody also, but yeah, so that's kind of how I think about it with the gear. I think for me, as I said, it's always evolving. The latest change I made was that I started using these John Doerr picks, because I tried them because they offered to send me some, and then I realized that they actually sent the ones they sent me. We talked about what I wanted, and then the ones he sent me, there was a few actually that sounded better than what I was using at the time, especially in terms of attack. So the attack is less pronounced here, and the ones I was using before this were a little bit had a little bit more attack, and I was trying to get rid of that. So that's the last change I really made to my sound. I mean, I upgraded my XFX in June, but I don't think it really changed my sound that much. I think the pick made a bigger impact on it. So in terms of how you just think about it and how you work on it when you're playing, so for me it's something that I've been playing guitar for a really long time, and it's not something I'm really spending a lot of time on. Of course, I record myself quite a lot, and that really helps because you get another perspective. I think you need to do that if you want to have an idea about what you sound like. You can't hear what you sound like if you're not, if you're playing yourself, because you're hearing partly what is in your head, and also you're not in the role of the audience or the role of somebody who's listening to the recording. So, and also, at least already with this guitar, I actually hear it acoustically also a bit. I think probably on this video you hear it acoustically as well. Not a lot, but you do hear it, and it has an influence. So recording yourself and then listening to that, if you want to have an idea about how you sound, is important. It's essential, actually. The same will go for if you're working on timing, by the way. But that's for another discussion. And yeah, so you need to record yourself, and then I guess try and think about what you like, and try and define that. And that can be a really difficult process, because like when I figured out that I wanted this sort of, I have an almost nasal tone, so my tone is very much like mid-focused, and I find that I like to have that because it's not necessarily the most beautiful tone when I'm playing alone like this, but in a band it really works well, it cuts quite well. And also I listened to recordings and found that was something that I liked and that I was going for, and then actually I figured out that I liked it before I knew what it was. And I think this is something that's sort of common, that we need to sort of develop the ability to say, well, okay, so there's a lot of high, or there's a lot of, to hear the different frequency areas, stuff like that, and get an idea about that. I think it's difficult, you know. It takes a bit of training, and you need to try it out, the right kind of overdrive or the right kind of compression, and you need to train that. But that's again also gear related. And then I mean, play solo stuff. And I think if you want to hear tone, I mean, one thing is of course like if you like the sound of that, but also you want to have especially just the longer notes and the sustained chords. So in that respect, and of course you kind of need to record it and then listen to it, and then just hear if it's the sound you want. And also this is something that's important when you're playing, and that you can judge also, like, because it's going to be different in every room. So some stages or some rooms are going to be really boomy, and then you need to turn down the bass or stuff like that. And this is also going to be important when you record stuff, if you're mixing with an engineer, that you know what you want and what you don't want, and you can be as precise as possible about it. That really helps. So for that, it can be time well spent to sort of sit with a recording of yourself and try and EQ it. For the rest, I mean, I spent most of my time practicing stuff where I try to play legato. So I'm connecting the notes, and as you can hear when I'm playing like this, I'm really also aware of like how hard I'm hitting the different things, because right now I'm playing 2 layers essentially. some of that, of course, and I think everybody also does that. That you have like just times when you just play a chord or a note, and then just try and listen to how does it actually sound. And do we want it to sound like? And of course, you can also work on different things. I don't do that really a lot, like the. If that's part of your playing, some people do that really a lot also, then you can check that out like that as well. But yeah, as I said, it's not something I really worked a lot on. I think I just played guitar a lot. I played a lot of acoustic guitar, of course, because I started with classical. I think that colored the way I think about it and the way I just do things. And also it means that I didn't have to work on it really a lot consciously. So maybe I'm not so much help when it comes to that. What ways can you do outside playing besides using chromatics and sidestepping? So much in the same way as with the reharmonizing of a standard, playing outside is about finding some sounds that are surprising and far away on top of the chords. So of course there are quite a few approaches to this. Most of them are, for me anyway, because I'm thinking mostly out of chords, are sort of related to just finding different chords. And you can do it in exactly the same way as I did in the reharmonization. So you start with a progression and you really start using other chords to go from one place to the next. And in that way you can sort of leave out some chords and you can do other things there. And but to demonstrate that, I need to take like larger progressions. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but you can also discuss it in terms of just having a one chord vamp, and then how do you find other options for this? Because like in the question you already mentioned side slipping, which is probably one of the most common ways of doing that. So if you have an A minor chord like this, then you sort of make lines and then you shift a half step up or down. So and then you have a line that starts here but then maybe moves up here and back, or here and then back. And that's one way. The idea is just that you move that, you move sort of everything so that if you just play some simple lines with that other material, it's gonna sound far away because it's a half step apart from what you would expect. And therefore creating a lot of tension. That's the basic idea. I have a lesson on side slipping you can check out also. So that's one way of doing it, and since that is the point, then you can of course also just start practicing different changes on top of any kind of chord. But for me that's not, that's a lot of checking out and it's not so useful. I tend to think more in progressions with that when it comes to that. So the other kind of outside that I use a lot is sort of taking a part out of the chord and then letting that decide what I'm doing, or in that way just changing the chord out. So of course you can be more or less outside when you do that. So sometimes it can be a nice surprising sound and it will be outside to just change an A minor into an A minor major and then really play just melodic minor on it, and that will be interesting enough and create variation enough, even though the question is if it's really what we would consider outside, because basically it is outside but it's only one note you're changing, so there's only one note that's really going to sort of sound very different, but of course it's also going to be like how you play the melody and stuff like that. So that's one way, or you can sort of change the sound of the chord by thinking a different variation on the chord. So if it's an A minor chord, you can make it into an A7, or you can make it into like a Phrygian chord, for instance. The Phrygian sound is nice because it's vague. It's like a little bit stable, but it also has some tension and it kind of wants to resolve, but it's not a full-blown like dominant sound that has to resolve. So in that way that can be nice, and you get some very sort of strong tension notes in the flat 9. So that will work really well. So then another approach would be to sort of take a part of the chord out and then let that decide the scale and just ignore the rest. So for an A minor chord, I think the obvious choice is to say, well, this is an A minor chord, so we're just looking at the C major triad, and then, well, C major, we can look at C major as being, of course it can be in all sorts of normal major scales and harmonic minor and all that, but it can also be part of an augmented scale. And an augmented scale is a C major triad, an A flat major triad, and an E major triad. So that's a completely different kind of sound, and then you can get some stuff with it like that and use that. Another thing that I do a lot is to think of the top notes here and then saying, well, it's A for a long time, and I'm gonna think sort of a tonic A minor sound, so that means that we have an augmented triad here, and then I just use the whole tone scale from that triad, so it's also something that's going to be very sort of strong sounding. A similar effect would be to just turn the chord into a diminished chord, so this chord instead of that one, and then you get like an A whole tone, whole half diminished, so resolving it there. And of course they will all have different structures that you can use, and you need to make some melodies with it, and you really do need to sort of know the scales. It's not enough to know the notes, you really need to make some sort of interesting melodies with it, because if you're just playing the scale, it's still just going to sound like a scale, you know, and most of the notes are going to fit anyway, or almost, or not sound really interesting in themselves. So you need to find a way to make melodies, and then also to sort of emphasize certain things that you can sort of pull out some interesting sounds out of it. And basically that boils down to that you have to be able to play some melody, you hear some melodies in the scale, and also maybe even be able to hear them on top of the A minor chord that we're using in this example. Okay, so I have a loop, so now let's just try and see if we can do some stuff here. So this is just an A minor 7 chord, so just this chord, just A minor. So A Phrygian. You can even make it like with a 13, so you get like sort of an A sus 13 sound, A sus flat 9 13 sound. So that's the Phrygian sound, and then so hold no, not the whole on the augmented scale. So that'll be this. Whole tone. And then the diminished scale. So So in that way, for me, for it to make sense for me, is like I still want to have some sort of connection to the A minor, and that means that I also have some notes that are sort of still going to sound inside, even though I'm trying to play something that's outside. So I have an overview of how everything is going to sound against the A minor, and also because I think it doesn't sound. I mean, if you only want to play like the notes that are not in the scale, you can do that too, because there are 12 notes in total, and the A minor already somehow implies 7 notes. So that means that if you take the remaining 5 notes, then you can have a scale that I think you get a pentatonic scale probably. Yeah, you get. So for A minor, you're just gonna get the pentatonic scale, the E flat minor pentatonic scale. So that can work as well, of course. That's just like making a tritone substitution on it. Let's just try that. So that will work as well. That's actually not something that I do really a lot. And with that, of course, with that sound, you don't really have anything that sort of will work as a sustaining note. Everything is just tension. So that's also why you want to resolve it maybe a bit quicker. But again, that's a question of taste. So yeah, I hope that gives you some ideas. I think for the rest, getting outside sounds for me is a lot about rethinking the progression, because I'm not really spending a lot of time playing modal stuff. And actually, when I do play a lot of modal stuff, I tend to focus on other things than trying to play outside, because then there are other things that are just as important in terms of intensity and dynamics and sort of the melodic flow and rhythm, and so you have other factors besides note choice that will make solos like that more interesting. And since I don't do it too much, I don't really go too much for the outside thing, I guess. It's the kind of thing you want to do maybe once or twice if you play a few sets in a concert, in my opinion. So that was some answers. I hope you don't get more questions from what I went over here than answers, or at least that you have something to explore and something to check out. If you want to ask some more stuff about the stuff I talked about here, you can of course comment on the video. And if you have a question in general, just anything you want to know about gear, playing, improvising, or stuff that you're sort of wondering about, whether it's about my playing or about your own playing, some stuff you're checking out, then leave a question, post a comment on the video. And of course, since a lot of people who watch these videos are actually quite serious about playing guitar, and some of them are even making YouTube lessons, then maybe they can even offer some information, because there's probably whatever is going to be asked, somebody else has also checked it out, so maybe they have something that they can tell you about, or maybe even answer your question, and maybe I'll learn something too. That's always nice, that's definitely the case, to see how you guys work with things is useful. And yeah, so for the rest, if you want to support my lessons, if you want to help me get more time to make these Q&A videos and my weekly YouTube lessons, then check out my WebStore. I'll link to it here in this video. That's at least one way. Another way is of course also just to like and subscribe and to share this video and help me spread the word. That's also very useful. So yeah, if you have a question, leave a comment on the video, and there's a new lesson on Thursday. Until next week.